And to get out of his Prestige deal, he recorded like 5 albums in the course of like a couple days, essentially. And then Prestige just shelved them and sort of let them out slowly as he started working on stuff for Columbia. So this was his first great quintet with John Coltrane. And so they were like in the studio from, these musicians would play a gig and then they would go to the studio and then record until like, 4 or 5 in the morning or something like that. So there's all this great like studio banter that's on some of the albums because, they were just doing take, and they left a lot of that stuff in. And there's one part where you can hear Miles, who's got like a really gravelly voice. He's like, when the red light's on, you're supposed to be quiet. So the red light is now on. So I'm going to be quiet and then you're going to read the opening. Okay.
Let's do it. When injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Allina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers with convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team. You're always close to the care that you need. Schedule now at allinahealth.org/ortho.
Good morning. Is it? Afternoon. I guess it's afternoon, but I don't know if it's good. Afternoon or evening, depending on when this finds you. Welcome to the Sound of the Loons podcast presented by Allina Health Orthopedics. I'm Steve McPherson. I'm joined by Callum Williams. Cal, it's a beautiful day in Minnesota. It's a gray winter day, but honestly, it hasn't been all that cold this year. It hasn't been too snowy so far. It's pretty mild out there. The MLS season is over for Minnesota United. It was a season that both kind of felt like it wasn't even happening and also felt like it never would end at the same time. And so I just wanted to start with some appreciation, which I think everybody expressed, from players to the social media account and everything like that. Just first for the fans, out there who hopefully make up a good percentage of the people listening to us. I don't know who else listens to us other than the fans who supported this team in whatever way they can during this weird era that we're all in right now. I hope for fans that having soccer and Minnesota United in your life during these last months has improved it to the extent that it can, given how strange everything is right now. And, we're going to get right to work, or maybe a little break and then right to work on the next season. And I wanted to give an appreciation for this team that was out there on the field and has been week in and week out, twice a week, traveling the day of the games and all that. As someone who's been with the team since the first game in MLS, it's just crazy to see the Loons minutes away from a trip to MLS Cup final this year. It was heartbreaking to see them lose the way they did. But I honestly, my heart didn't really break for me. It broke for these players because I think they really gave it all they could out there. And I think that, lots of people are going through hardship right now. What the players are dealing with is not, losing their jobs. There's a lot of things going on in the world that are very difficult, but let's not sugarcoat it. It's a tough thing to go out there and do what they're doing week in and week out and leave it all out there. And then, have to face, back to regular life now after being so close to the MLS Cup final. So, Cal, your first raw thoughts at this point now, less than 24 hours later.
Well, it is still very raw, yeah. Steve. Yeah. However long it feels like it was 12? 3 hours ago. Yeah. Who knows?
13 hours.
Who knows? Feels like, like it was a second ago. It also feels like it was an eternity ago. I don't think anybody's really slept that well. I was up at 8 o'clock or whatever, which is early for me, the day after a game, and just couldn't really get settled, to be honest. It does feel like a massive missed opportunity, but we can't dwell on that too much, Steve, because at the end of the day, it's not like Minnesota have lost to Cincinnati or something, and I say that with all due respect. They've lost to the very best team in Major League Soccer, and they came ever so close as well. And it's still raw. The emotions will be there for a long time. This will sting and hurt for a long time. But as you said and insinuated, there are plans already for 2021 that have been in place for a couple of weeks now. I know for a fact the backroom staff is already working on a couple of new additions. They had the 2021 budget and sort of roster restrictions and whatnot given to them a few weeks ago, to my knowledge. So they've been working on that for some time. So there's already been sort of half an eye on 2021 for a while. And that's encouraging, because what I will say, Steve, is whilst it was extremely disappointing to lose in the way they did, you get the feeling this team is only a player or two away from being really, really serious MLS Cup contenders.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that was the disappointment is interesting. I think it was the thing Ethan Finlay said after the game, that it's good that fans are disappointed. This is, hold us to task. This team doesn't have the goal of being happy with losing the Western Conference Final. The team has the goal of winning MLS Cup. Like, that's what he plays the game for. That's what so many of those guys play the game for. Be disappointed. But I just think that the thing I immediately went to in the wake of the game was, and we talked about it, I believe, before the playoffs even started, going back to the preseason expectations. And I looked back at my notes on what I had expected before the season began, when we did a podcast talking about the season. And I was like, my baseline expectation, now there's a range of possibilities, right? My baseline expectation is making the playoffs and winning a game in round one, and that was looking at a team that had, had signed Luis Amarilla, that had Tyler Miller, that had Ozzie Alonso had played almost all the games last season. Iko Para was, what was that?
Yes. Iko Para, yep, sorry.
Iko Para, Defender of the Year. And so that was my expectation. After the first two games of the season, where they won 2 games away, if at that moment you had, and I said this on Twitter, like, if at that moment you had told me, hey, they're gonna handle their business in round one, they're gonna upset the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, which is Sporting Kansas City, with a clean sheet, on the road, and then go to Seattle and have a 2-0 lead. And then they're gonna lose at the death. I'd be like, no, it's unfortunate, but man, like, I'll take that like any day. I expected like a step from last season, and it was a leap without all those guys who had been so key in those opening couple games. And I just think, I'm not saying that it's not disappointing. I'm not saying they should be excused for it. I agree with Finlay. I think it's like, we have, as you set the bar and raise the bar, you got to keep raising it. But like, that's extraordinary. Like, the team had an amazing season. And this is even discounting the fact that there was a pandemic we didn't know about before the season. Maybe we should have known about it. But anyways, that disrupted everything. So, I just think that we should take a moment to appreciate that perspective.
I think it's progression in capital letters, in my opinion, Steve. Each year the team have gotten better. And I know Adrian Heath has said this a few times now, but it's difficult to disagree with him, because it looks as if it is the case. From just about every angle when you look at Minnesota United. So, the question is now is if we continue on this trajectory, what is the expectation next year? One would assume that, if they continue to operate on this trajectory with the roster that they have, and a couple of added pieces that they will need and do need, in my opinion, this team, as I said earlier on, has to be in the conversation once again, at the very least for the playoffs. But again, and it's difficult to make this prediction right now, because we don't know what else the other teams in the Western Conference will do, and they will strengthen. Yeah. And we don't know what they look like yet. But coming off the back of what we've just seen, one would assume that once again, Minnesota United would have aspirations to again be involved, at the very least, in the Western Conference Final. Not to put any pressure on anybody, any words in anybody's mouths, but there is a standard now with this team. It's not been the case throughout the entirety of its MLS existence. We've been able to say that. There is now an expectation with this team. A lot of that came after the 2019 season, no doubt. But Minnesota met those expectations from 2019 and 2020, and arguably went even further. So progression is the word that I continue to come back to, Steve, because that's exactly what they've done. I described it on our radio broadcast yesterday, in the post-game show. It's very easy to come in and be someone like an Atlanta United or an LAFC and throw cash at people, and do it that way. I'm not sure if that's, from a longevity point of view, I'm not sure that's the way to do it. What Minnesota are doing is that they're doing it slow and steady. not to throw shade or disrespect to someone like Atlanta United, but it's almost like a fast foods franchise in the sense that they just throw it and just get the business done as quickly as possible. And we've done it. Okay, great. That's all we need to do. And it's done the business as quickly as possible. Minnesota are something like, a well distinguished meal that's been in the oven for, half an hour or something, and you're just waiting for it to be ready. And I think they're cooking at the right temperature right now, Minnesota United are. And it's slow, it's steady progression. And ultimately, long term, if you want to build the reputation of this club, I think they're going about it the right way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do want to get back to Seattle a little bit specifically, but I think your point is well taken, and I agree. I think that I don't know if one is better than the other. I mean, obviously Atlanta hit hard immediately. They've struggled this season, obviously. No, I would never bet against a team that's willing to spend that kind of money turning it around quickly, which is not what Minnesota is built for either. There was sort of some debate. This is as the Loons were beating a Sporting Kansas City. On the broadcast, there was a lot of talk about how this was all part of the plan. Like this was the plan, this 3-year plan. This is how this is going to work. And then on social media, I saw some people being like, listen, they were terrible. Like, I don't know if this is part of the plan. I think that both sides misapprehend the plan a little bit in that sense, because I think that it's not as if in 2017, Adrian Heath was sitting there going, I'm going to have Reynoso in 2020. It's not as if it's not chess, right? All those moves didn't result in the game that they have right now. But I think that it's important to note that while there were misses early on, there was, notable things that went wrong. They never missed big, and I think that was kind of, to me, what I've seen in terms of the plan over the last 4 years, which is you're going to take some swings, you're going to take your cuts, you're going to try things, but you're going to try to be in a position where if something doesn't pan out, you have other options to move towards. And I think that's what we saw. I think you saw it with regards to the way the initial roster was built with, Vadim Demidov. Nobody ever wants to hear that name again. Vadim Demidov, who gets a bad rap, by the way. But anyways, Demidov, other Scandinavians, this was sort of like, this is going to be the path. Didn't really work. So pivot, move around. Fernando Bob, Maximiano, these guys who are like, we're bringing them in. We'll see how it works out. When it didn't work out, we got rid of them, traded, moved people around and everything like that. And got Darwin Quintero as the first DP at a moment when the team desperately needed somebody who could galvanize fans and be a scorer. And he was that. And then when that stopped working, moved on from it, until really getting, building in these veterans last season with Ike and Ozzy and those guys, and then going out and getting those your Reynosos, Robin Lod, these players who maybe, have a little more runway in front of them. I'm not saying that they got everything right. I'm not saying that I'm saying that I think there is a plan, which is to take moves that you can move off from if they go wrong. And I think that's smart. And I think that's an important part of building a team in a market like this. That's a team that's a size like this.
You have to, because you're not going to go and spend 10, 11, 12 million dollars on a player. That's already been proven unless things change this year. But the one in terms of what I think they might have, the only one I can think of, Steve, in terms of where they might have got it wrong from a positional standpoint, is obviously when Ramirez was sold off, and it was a deal that needed to happen at that stage because Ramirez wanted to go. It was a large amount of money that was given to the club in a year where Ramirez's wages were going to be astronomical. They replaced him from a positional standpoint with Angelo Rodriguez, which didn't really work.
Right.
But in terms of what they actually replaced him with and the money they got for him, had they not have done that, they wouldn't have been able to get in Ozzy Alonso and Iko Para and even Vito Minone as well. So, look, ultimately, I think you're right. And in the sense of them getting a lot of things right over the course of the last 2 years, particularly as well. It's encouraging signs for Minnesota United. And I'm intrigued to see what they do in this offseason, Steve. I really am. I'm sure we'll get to that a bit later on. But it's looking at the season that Minnesota have had, I can't help but think of anything but being optimistic in terms of 2021, especially when you have a full season of Emmanuel Reynoso.
Yeah, I mean, We'll get to Reynoso. Let's hold Reynoso. We're going to talk a little bit about next year, possibly. I want to get to him at that point. I don't want to move off of Seattle quite yet, as much as most of us would want to move off of Seattle. One of the things I wanted to address is I feel like right at the end of the game, obviously, people got on social media and were just like, this is so Minnesota sports. This is Minnesota sports. This is what we do. We collapse and we fall apart, blah, 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 whatever like that. First of all, shut up. Like the Minnesota sports thing is like, I'm so sick of it. Like, it's like, you're just looking for a reason to feel good about yourself or feeling bad about sports. Get over it. Minnesota United, like there's plenty of teams, the Minnesota Lynx, prime among them, who have been successful. Minnesota United has gotten better every season so far. Like whatever. I don't feel like it's part of the Minnesota United is part of this narrative quite yet. And I wanted to point out specifically that collapse comes up a lot. Watching that game, having watched, 3-0 games in a row before it, that 2-0 lead did not look like the 2-0 leads that Minnesota United had before scoring a third goal in those previous games. Like, Seattle looks supremely confident all the time. First of all, talking about what Minnesota United needs to aspire to as far as developing, to have that kind of unflappability. Sounders were like, yeah, we're down 2. It's okay. We're going to be fine. Like, at no point did you ever get any sense that they were concerned about that. That's fantastic. Minnesota's 2 goals came off of dead ball, set pieces. They did not come in the run of play. They were often getting pinned back against their own goal. They had opportunities and they took those opportunities to their credit. But like, that was a no, to me, it didn't feel like a collapse, because in some ways it felt like, well, if this gets away being 2-0 or 2-1, like Minnesota United will have gotten away with something, I think.
Yeah. So look, here are my thoughts on the game itself. It wasn't Minnesota United's best performance by any stretch of the imagination. And I haven't really seen a lot of what the coaching staff have said after, but I would assume they would say something quite similar. The biggest issue that I thought, Steve, that caused them a problem was the direct passes from the Sounders back line. Because what it did is it released Jones and Morris, who are both full of pace, full of energy, and it caused Minnesota United a few problems. At the moment, it's difficult to do much about that, because the best way to do something about that is to defend from the front. And usually the most effective way of doing that is by having a pressing centre forwards, which Minnesota don't have at the moment. Robin Lod offers a lot, but that's certainly one thing he doesn't really do in abundance. It's also why I wasn't surprised when Kai Kamara came on as well. I know Kai Kamara isn't an abundance of speed, but he's probably the best option we've got in terms of that when he did come on. Mm-hmm. Because I thought, Steve, Minnesota actually contained Lodeiro quite well. I thought Alonso and Gregush actually did quite well in the centre of midfield. They were both asked to sit a little deeper, which I wasn't too surprised at, which meant Lodeiro had to pick up the ball deeper. If you go back and watch the game, Steve, every time, or for the most part, when Lodeiro picks up the ball, it's usually in a deeper position. And Adrian Heath would have been okay with that. Obviously, the closer Lodeiro is to goal, the more worried you become. So the thing for me, as I said, was the long direct balls over the top from the Sounders. I don't think Minnesota found a strong enough way to deal with it. But ultimately, like you said, Steve, that they are champions for a reason. There's a reason why the Sounders are where they are. Also, the other thing that I thought changed the game as well, and it was no coincidence that Brian Schmetzer bought off the 2 fullbacks for the Sounders as well. Brad Smith and Kelvin Leerdam are arguably the first choice right back and left back. And I thought when they came on, they gave the Sounders a real lift, because what happened was, when you've got Jones and Morris, it's similar to what Minnesota have in terms of Molino and Lod when they play on the flanks. They play on the opposite side to their strongest foot. So naturally, they are going to tuck in and play sort of inverted wide players. Mm-hmm. And so that meant a lot of the times the Sounders didn't have a lot of width. No doubt there were attempts. Alex Roldan got forward from time to time, and Yuhu Tolo did the same as well, but it wasn't enough for Seattle. As soon as Smith and Leerdam came on, I thought they made an impact instantly, because the Sounders had genuine threat from out wide. If you look back at the Will Bruin goal, the first goal for Seattle, the ball from the right comes in from Leerdam. And yes, it finds Rui Diaz, who has his shot deflected. But ultimately, if that cross doesn't come in, I don't think Seattle score in that situation. So credit where credit's due. Brian Schmetzer did a fabulous job. The only other thing I would have perhaps changed, Steve, because I thought it was obvious, I thought there was a handful of Minnesota United players who were running on fumes at the end of the game. I thought they looked absolutely exhausted, and that'll be for an abundance of reasons. But obviously, they've had nowhere near the rest and the time to prep for this game that the Sounders have. It would have been difficult to take out the likes of Alonso and Molino and Lourdes. I know Lourdes eventually came off in the dying embers, but I think if I was in charge, at some stage I probably would have introduced the likes of Ja'Cory Hayes and maybe gone with 3 centre backs and gone with 5 at the back and tried to defend for dear life, if you will. But trying to find the time to do that is difficult as well, because no doubt the Sounders got some momentum when they scored that first goal. And that was the 74th minute or so. I think that's too early to go to a back 5, So it was a head-scratching moment for Adrian Heath and co. But ultimately, look, Minnesota gave an exceptional account of themselves. The goal from Reynoso is absolutely out of this world. It's one of the better free kicks you'll see all season. And Dibassi, once again, has proven that he can score from set pieces and is a threat. So, ultimately it's disappointing with the way that it's ended. But we have to remember that at one stage, Minnesota, away to the MLS champions, were leading by 2-0.
Yeah, I mean, absolute props to Seattle for those, and Brian Schmetzer. Once again, it's fun to read. I was reading about his comments afterwards, and he's kind of like, "Man, I don't even know how that happened." And I'm like, "I think you know how it happened." Like, he's very humble, which is nice, and quite appealing. But terrific tactical, decision making as far as substitutions. I mean, when you bring on, Bruin, Leerdam, Smith, and Svensson, who ends up scoring, the winning goal, you made the correct choices in that case. I think that obviously the substitution thing is what everybody is pulling their hair out over. And it's a thing we've talked about before, and Adrian has talked about it, that it's his approach, which is to say, I pick the team that I think can go the distance. I don't pick for who I'm going to substitute. I pick for who I think can do the whole thing. And I think it's fair to say, I think one thing that is not being talked about is that the Sounders, went with consistency because they had success in their last game. And so they had the Roldan brother, not Christian. Thank you, Alex. I was like, Adrian? No, I'm getting confused. So Alex Roldan, playing right back, which is not his normal position, but it had worked. So you go with it. Schmetzer brought in, his better players. Like he brought players who were better than the players he took off. Adrian Heath didn't really have that option in the same kind of way. He started the strongest 11 that he could start, basically. And they were totally running on fumes by the end. I think one of the other problems, obviously bringing in some fresh legs could help. I also felt, though, that given the amount of guys who are on fumes and the role of the guys who were probably the tiredest, Alonso, et cetera, like that, you can't just take them out, at that moment and throw in some new guys who are respect to Ja'Cory Hayes has had an amazing season. I think Marlon Harrison has had good appearances. Jose Aja has been good. Brent Coleman coming back has been good. None of those guys are up to the level of the guys who are out there right now. They can work with them and everything like that. But, and maybe it's one of those things you can second guess all day. If he had brought in 5 at the back, park the bus on the road also, which is parking the bus on the road is a very difficult thing to do. And then still giving up those goals, everybody would be calling for his head again. It's easy to say after the fact, you should have done this. I don't know. To me, it's and this gets into something that I'm just going to transition to this. This is a thing I wanted to say about Adrian Heath, which is that he's not above criticism. I think even he himself welcomes criticism. He welcomes, people. He understands that this is part of the game. When you're a head coach, he talks about this all the time. You're paid to make these decisions. They're tough decisions. You have to live with the consequences. But he can't only be responsible for the bad things that happen to Minnesota United. I see a lot of this, well, how do you fail to do this? It's he game planned to beat Sporting Kansas City on the road. The only reason you're there is because that worked. He doesn't get credit for that. It seems a lot of times there's sort of a particular strain of criticism, which is just the good things that happen are all down to the players and what they did and, fortune and their good hearts. And then when everything bad happens, it's Adrian Heath's fault. And that drives me kind of crazy. I've got issues with things he chooses to do. I'm sure you do as well, but it's like, that's okay. But he should get credit for the good things that happen as well, because he's responsible for those, especially given the amount of power he has with personnel right now.
Yeah, so I didn't realize this was a thing, Steve. I've not really been on social media.
Just stay off it. It's so bad. I'm trying to avoid it mostly. But
I didn't really. The only thing I put out that I was like, I didn't really know what to say, to be honest. I didn't feel as though I'd be able to get my thoughts across in 140 characters or whatever Twitter allows you to these days, and so I didn't. As I said, I've not been on Twitter. I haven't seen a lot of this stuff. So. If people are genuinely once again saying that Adrian Heath it needs to go or things of that effect, I can't agree with that at all. It's just not even a thought right now. Anybody who has a half a footballing brain would understand that. It can't be a thought. You may dislike him as a coach. You may dislike some of the traits he has and some of the approaches that he has and the way he goes about his side's playing. But to get rid of someone who was just bought a team who was not expected to be anywhere near this, by the way, to the Western Conference final, it's beyond absurd to me, Steve. So I didn't realise that was the case. Look, everyone's entitled to their opinion. Sure. But I, for the life of me, can't understand that one at all.
Yeah, and I think that the thing about elimination formats like this is there's only two ways to go out. You either lose at some point or you win everything. There's not, and it's like to me, it's like if you're looking again at Minnesota United and the expectations, like they more than justified their seed. They handled their business when they were the top seed. And they defeated the number one seed in the Western Conference. They already exceeded expectations, right? If they had hung on for the win, right, and then had gone to play Columbus and lost to Columbus, I feel like people would be like, I can't believe they lost to Columbus. Like, sort of like not appreciating the things you already got. Like, it's hard to think about it because I have the same issue sometimes, but I feel like over time, you're going to look back at that Sporting Kansas City win and really be like, wow. This team, that's really where they showed where they were at, talking about like how good that run of play was, where they put together those goals on the road again in a place they had never won, and so that's like, I think that stuff is going to endure as we move into next season. I'm ready to talk about next season a little bit. First, I'm going to let you know when injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Allina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers with convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team. You're always close to the care you need. Schedule now at allinahealth.org/ortho. All right, let's talk a little slow. We're going to our crystal balls. It's a little early for crystal balling. We talked about scheduling this podcast. I was like, let's just do it because we hadn't really been able to fit one in between the SKC game and the Seattle game. And I was like, I'm scheduling for the day after. Who knows what's going to happen? And I'm like, obviously, we're like maybe not quite ready to think too much about. We don't even know when the next season is exactly going to start. I believe Don Garber, commissioner, friend of the pod, we've had him on as guest before. Don Garber said they were looking at like early to mid-March as a start for the season, which seems very fast to me. But I don't know. So we don't even really know what it's going to look like. But I'm going to open with this talking about next season. I am confident that Reynoso could easily be one of the top 5 players in MLS next season.
Yeah, without question, Steve. The fact that he got 7 assists in 3 playoff games, no player's ever done that in Major League Soccer. Throughout their 25-year history of MLS, no player's ever done that.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for a full season with Reynoso for sure. He's a talent. The free kick is wonderful from the boy, isn't it? It's just absolutely hit with such perfection. He comes across the ball and it goes, zips away from Stefan Fry. It's an absolutely supreme free kick, and it's just good to know that Minnesota have got him. And it's funny, I bumped into somebody, a fan, a friend, Sam from the Dark Clouds in my local grocery store yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And we spoke about Reynoso, because obviously he's the main man right now. And And look, it's okay to understand that this is probably what's going to happen. If Minnesota get 2 years out of this kid, great. Not a problem at all. But he's just turned 25. He's on the cusp of the Argentine national team. He's going to get noticed at some stage. He already has been noticed. There was a top team in Brazil that tried to sign him, but he wanted to come to Minnesota. I think if he carries on the trajectory that he is on, before too long, Steve, there's going to be plenty of admiration. There's going to be plenty of individuals that would want to come and sign him. And Minnesota will make a humongous profit on him. I don't even know what you would say he's worth right now, because we've not even had a full season of him. Imagine how much he's going to be worth after a full season. So, and it's okay to be this as well. Most leagues in the world are selling leagues. It's okay to identify as this. Even the Premier League at some stages have to sell their players on, their stars on. So that's what I would expect to happen. So let's enjoy Reynoso whilst we've got him, because he's one heck of a talent.
Yeah, I mean, he's... I was thinking about it, and I'm like, Vela, obviously up there, Pozuelo, MVP winner, is up there. Nico Ladero, I mean, still doing it at his level up there. You could start making arguments for Heel, possibly Carlos Heel, like depending. Again, we haven't seen. He was out for most of this season, but he's right up in that top 5, top 10 at worst. As far as an individual player who can make a difference for his team like that, and that's just. It's tremendously fun. And as you said, we haven't even seen him fully unleashed. We talked about this early on where he's maybe 80%, if what we're seeing now is not even 100%, which I think it's safe to say he's getting up into the 90s, but again, the scoring is one of those, the assists are obviously huge. If he can start scoring free kicks like that, I mean, and his corner kick delivery has been unbelievable. He's just going to be one of those guys who does everything in the attack for the team, and it's just going to be tremendous. I'm super looking forward to it as well.
Really looking forward to it, Steve. You mentioned the set piece deliveries, the corner kicks. He whips them in with such zip and pace. They're so inviting, the area that he puts them into. He puts them into really good areas where, players want to go and attack the ball. Dibasi has done that 2 games now. And I'm sure we'll see this again, over the course of the 2021 season. But what was astounding, as I said earlier on, Steve, was the actual goal that he scored. It was just absolutely wonderful technique. Stefan Fry, in my opinion, still one of the best goalkeepers in Major League Soccer as well. So to do that against him on his own patch as well, Reynoso, I thought was, he's been a magnificent signing for Minnesota United. I don't think he was near his best against Seattle last night, though. I thought he looked tired. But again, what you would say to players like that now is that it's been a great year. You've been magnificent. Go and put your feet up. Go and rest, because we need you next year. Go and find a beach somewhere in Argentina, or maybe find a beach in Minnesota that's covered in snow. I don't know, but go and find a beach somewhere, have a cocktail, and just relax, because we are really going to need you in 2021. I think he's going to be a star player, Steve.
I'm just going to pretend you were talking to me when you said go find a beach and get a cocktail. I'm just going to...
You are more than welcome, mate. Yeah, you've worked your backside off this year.
Let's talk about it. And then now we're entering the realm of pure speculation. I'm only going here because somebody actually directly asked about it. Thinking about players next year, a decision has to be made by Minnesota United. Just sort of your feeling about what you think, if you think these players will be back. Again, I'm guaranteeing nothing. We don't know anything about any of this. We have been told nothing. Ozzy Alonso, do you feel like Mr. Alonso is going to be back for another season with Minnesota United?
I think it's a difficult one to say, Steve, because my heart says yes and my head says no.
Okay.
He'll be 36 next year. The one thing that Minnesota, and I'm not suggesting Alonso will be, but the one thing Minnesota can't afford next year is passengers. They need everybody on the same wavelength, because if they are going to better what they've done this year, they are going to need an abundance of quality. And again, I'm not suggesting Alonso would ever be a passenger, but perhaps the club might have outgrown a 36-year-old holding midfielder now. I don't know, Steve. Maybe that's me being extremely harsh, but I would say here's what I'll say. If Minnesota have a replacement in mind, whether that's Asani Dotson or whether that is going and getting a number 6, I would suggest Alonso probably won't be with the club next year. If they don't, I would look at re-signing him on a number that works for the club.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that it's one of those things where it depends so much on a lot of moving pieces. I'm sure if they could find their number 6 of the future, which I have questions about whether Hassani. I feel like Hassani is just much more downhill than a real number 6. We've talked about it before. He's more of a box to box. So, if you've got your destroyer of the future and you're like, this is who it is, and he's at the right spot, then you take him, and I think maybe it's time to move on from Ozzy. But if you have to draft somebody and you're not sure, you keep Ozzy on to sort of smooth that transition, like you said, hopefully for a number that works for the club. Yeah, that's about where I am as well. Luis Amarilla, interesting case. It seems like from what I've seen, and this is all public from Adrian Heath, the feeling is like they felt like they saw enough of him. And, and again, so much of what they saw about him is not what we got to see because, he's been working out. He's, he was with the team. He was trying to make it right. He was trying to get back and it couldn't happen. So he ended up getting the surgery. It seems like they sort of feel like there's enough there that they want to try to work something out with Velez Sarsfield and figure out either another loan or something. But what's your feeling on Amarilla?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key right there, isn't it, Steve, is working something out with Velez Sarsfield because I would be surprised if they would want to do another loan. Mm-hmm. I think at that stage they've probably moved on from the player. Because now, if you think about it, Steve, he's had 2 loan spells in 2 years.
Sure.
He's 25 now.
Yep.
It's either going to be you're a part of the roster moving forward or you're not. So I'd be surprised if Velez wanted to do another loan deal. So that begs the question: do the team want to spend the money to bring him in, which I can't imagine would be millions and millions of dollars. It might be $1 or $2 million transfer fee, but that's the risk you take. Have we seen enough of him to warrant spending that type of money? I don't know. If it can be a loan deal, great. Bring him back, no problem at all, no questions asked. My immediate concern would be, are the club going to spend a decent amount of money on a player that we've not seen enough in Major League Soccer, in my opinion? Maybe they, as coaches, have seen enough on the training field. Who knows? But if the situation can work out, Steve, absolutely, you bring back Luis Amarilla.
Yeah, I think that again, if the number can work, it sort of depends on if they decide they have another center forward that they have their eye on. Surely making a run into the Western Conference Finals is going to open some doors to some clubs who might not have been, dealing with Minnesota United before. That kind of thing can help with that. And again, moving pieces, right? Like if you can bring Amarilla back for a reasonable amount and know he's maybe one of 2 good options, that's a lot different than saying, okay, well, we're going to put a lot of money into this guy who's going to be our number 1 option. We don't know if he can do it. But I have to say, like, based on the first couple of games, this past season, the idea of Reynoso and sort of unlocked, Molino, we'll get to Molino, but some that sort of midfield with a player like Luis Amarilla is I believe mouth-watering is a word I would borrow from you.
Yep, I wouldn't disagree there, Steve. I know Reynoso had said, hadn't he, in press interviews when he first arrived, that he had watched a lot of Amarilla's tape to see what he could do to combine with him. So, as I said, if it's possible, absolutely you bring back Amarilla.
Yeah. All right. Ethan Finlay, sort of, this was brought up in with regards to the playoffs, sort of a little bit of the forgotten man of that attacking front 4 with regards to seeing Lod sort of break out as a false 9 and obviously the headline grabbing of Molino and Reynoso, but does a lot of really good stuff and has at times been that sort of guy when they try to shut down that other side. Sometimes he's opened that up. Tireless, great runner, great leader, veteran. What do you think? What do you think about Ethan Finlay?
Bring him back, no question. Absolutely no question about it, Steve. He's on a good number, to my knowledge. It's not a massive amount. He is. He still has that tint of blue in his collar, which I think a lot of teams still need in Major League Soccer. I'd bring him back in a heartbeat. Absolutely no question. I don't care that he'll be 31 this coming season. I don't care. I still think he's got tremendous value. Which leads me to my second point. He's got tremendous value. Do the club see that and try to get something for him? I don't know. Because the question is now, Steve, when he gets to 32, he's not as valuable, and purely because of his age. So do the club now try and get what they can for him? Maybe not necessarily wanting to, but understanding this is perhaps the best time to let him go. Me personally, I would bring him back in a heartbeat. I think he's such an important piece to this puzzle. But I could see a lot of teams being very interested if Ethan Finlay ever becomes available.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the club willing to say, if you make us, the Godfather offer, we'll go for it. I mean, that was essentially what happened with Mason Toye. Mason wanting to move on and find a place he could start. And then as they looked around, Montreal was just offering something that they were like, this is the best deal. I mean, we're going to get a lot for him. Christian Ramirez also, sold to LAFC for a lot more than he would probably garner right now, so it's one of those things where if Finlay is tremendously valuable for the team. Is he invaluable? Maybe not, depending on what the kind of number is that comes back for him. So, but great guy, one of my favorites, fun to talk to, very loquacious. And a good quote, as anybody can see from the availability last night. Last question for this, Kevin Molino, obviously maybe the most fraught decision. We know that he is a favorite of Adrian Heath's. They sort of go together like peanut butter and chocolate, or peanut butter and jelly. I don't know which you think goes better with the other, but they've gone through this whole thing together. Molino looks maybe as good as he's ever looked next to Reynoso. What do you think about Kevin Molino's future here?
Well, just before I do Molino, Steve, just back to Ethan Finlay quickly. Yeah. What I will say is that he is very, very valuable, as I sort of already said a little earlier on. He's valuable to Minnesota, but could he be more valuable to somebody else is essentially what I was trying to say there. Sure. Molino, you bring him back, absolutely. You get a deal figured out. This is the one that they've really got to figure out, in my opinion, because we really got a glimpse of Kevin Molino, fully fit, fully motivated Kevin Molino, alongside a stupendous number 10. I wonder what Molino looks like and I say this with all due respect to Robin Lod and the centre forwards that have played for Minnesota. What does he look like with a centre forward that can play with the three behind him, but also guarantee you 15 goals a season? Yeah. That's a really mouth-watering prospect, that is. And I would absolutely try and figure it out as quickly as possible, that deal, because people will be aware, Steve, the vultures will start circling as soon as it becomes knowledge enough around the footballing circle that Molino's contract talks aren't going as well as they should have gone. If that becomes a reality, people will absolutely pounce. Again, he could be extremely valuable to just about every team in Major League Soccer. I think Molino finds a place in just about every team in Major League Soccer. Minnesota know that as well. They know what they have in him. Get the deal done, get it signed, get him in the club once again for another couple of years.
Yeah, I think the thing about Molino's position right now in the club with Reynoso and coming in is that I think that if you were hoping that Molino would be sort of your difference maker in the number 10 spot, or sort of in the midfield going into his 30s, maybe that's not the best, route to go. But seeing him next to a guy in his mid 20s who's can sort of draw that attention, can open things up for Molino. I was saying, I worked on an article the other day about mostly about Reynoso, but talking about Molino, how like with the ball at his feet, he sort of wants to create, and with the ball off his feet, he wants to sort of get in there and score goals. The problem has sort of been that with the ball at his feet, he has trouble sometimes scoring goals. Like if he's controlling it, trying to cut through the defense and then take a shot, he seems to work so well finding guys. And then once he's found guys, running off them to find those spots. And with Reynoso, it's like the perfect combination there. So if you're bringing Kevin Molino in to be like your second guy, who's great in your midfield, it's a fantastic fit. And I agree. You got to get it done. Last thing I want to talk about real briefly, obviously center forward is the main one, but any other positions of need? Every season, it's like, where do we need to shore up? We talked a little bit about the future number 6. Is there any place where you're like, there's an upgrade that could happen there?
I think the 6 and the centre forward, Steve, are the two main areas really for Minnesota United now. I could see an argument maybe for going to get a younger centre back to push Boxall, who will be 33 this coming season. Dibasi will be 32. By no means am I suggesting either of them should be pushed out of the starting 11, because I think they've been exceptional, especially Michael Boxall. Mm-hmm. But they're getting to that age now where you perhaps have to watch the minutes. So I could see them going and finding a younger centre-back for sure. I know Aha and Coleman are available. Coleman, 30 years of age, Aha, 28. We don't know what's going to happen with them in terms of them being kept around. So it wouldn't surprise me if they potentially went and had a look at a younger centre-back somewhere. I think left-back is an issue. Not an issue. I think a left-back is a situation where they would like to strengthen. Obviously, as we've said before, they've had no issues in sliding Dibasi over. But I think the preference there is having him at centre-back. So maybe a backup left-back would help. Alonso, being the age that he will be this year, you can't expect him to play every single game. So the question will be there is, are they willing to rely on Hassani Dotson in that role throughout the entirety of the campaign? Because ultimately that's what they're going to have to do if they don't go and get somebody else in. And then for me, Steve, the biggest issue, the biggest conundrum for them is at centre forward. They need to go and get somebody who can guarantee you 15 goals, 20 goals a year. It's not easy to find them. I'm saying that, it trickles off the tongue very easily, but it's not easy to find them. They cost a lot of money. If the club are willing to go and spend money again, they have to go and get a centre forward that will guarantee you goals. I don't know what that looks like, Steve, whether they're going to go into Europe, back down to South America. Maybe there's a centre forward internally in the league that they fancy looking at. I don't know. But ultimately, I know already that efforts are being made. There is a list of players that they like, and they will be doing everything in their power. The coaching staff and the scouting department, the technical director, GM, everybody will be doing their due diligence over the course of the next few months. Whilst you and I take a little bit of time off, this is busy season for them. So, very much looking forward to seeing what Minnesota United can do in this off-season.
Yeah, lots to think about, lots to hash out. I'm sure we'll be readdressing it as we proceed with Sound of the Loons through the off-season. Sometimes we pull back a little bit, sometimes a little more like every other week. Depends on how quick and hard and fast the news comes at us, and also when we're going to start playing again. So I guess we'll all be finding out about that before too long. Everybody, thanks for joining us for the 123rd. I'm drinking sparkling water, I swear.
Oh.
Thanks for joining us for the 123rd Sound of the Loons podcast presented by Allina Health Orthopedics. Be sure to leave us a nice review on iTunes, or at the very least a 5-star rating, and follow the team on Twitter at MNUFC. You can follow Cal at CalWilliamsCom and me at Steve Venturis. Apologies, as always, to Richard Wagner. And remember, there's only one person in this whole world like you, and people can like you exactly as you are.